The amount of time we spend together probably matters, but less time doesn't mean less love. Syou Ishida will prescribe you a cat. I'm Jacob Szymanski. This is AMI Audiobook Review. Regular contributor Danielle McLaughlin is with me. No Rami Amathan for this chat, and that's fine because this one's for the cat people. Danielle, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to talking about cats with you.
This conversation came about for two reasons. One, because you suggested we read this book, We'll Prescribe You a Cat, which is originally a Japanese book that got translated into English after it became a sensation in Japan and then blew up across the world. And two, I got a cat 4 days ago. As I'm recording this, I got a brand new cat called Guillaume. And the fact that you sent in this email saying, let's talk about this book, We'll Prescribe You a Cat. Unbelievable that I prescribed myself a cat just before you sent this email. The stars really aligned for this one.
What a happy coincidence. And how's Guillaume doing?
Guillaume's doing all right. He's taken some time to get used to the new place. He came from a rescue, so not the best upbringing. Didn't came from the best situation, but he's slowly been getting more playful and talkative. Such a sweet little gentleman. I love this guy.
Oh.
Are you a cat person? I can tell you're a cat person, but what extent are you a cat person?
Well, I've had quite a few over my lifetime. Unfortunately, my husband developed a terrible allergy to cats, so we do not currently have any. We had a pair of cats, and it got to the point where my husband was relegated to one room and the cats had the run of the house, and then he said, wait a minute, who's paying the mortgage here? And we had to find them another home, fortunately with cousins down the street, so they were still in our lives, but we just couldn't keep them in our home any longer. It was getting to be a medical issue. Sadly, I still like them a lot, though. All my kids and grandkids have cats.
It seems to run in the family. If you had a dog growing up, there's a chance all the kids are going to have dogs growing up. And then if it's a cat household, it's going to remain a cat household. Every single person in my family also has a cat in their house. So it runs in the blood. Let's talk about this book that you suggested us. We'll Prescribe You a Cat by Syou Ishida. What was the background here? Do you want to?
Well, I have to say that I picked it up because I loved the title. I thought, oh, that's wonderful. We'll prescribe you a cat. And I started imagining what it was going to be about. It wasn't far off, except that there's a lot more fantasy to it than I had expected. Basically speaking, it's several different short stories put together, all of which revolve around a kind of mysterious clinic where people who are having trouble with their lives for a variety of reasons, they've heard about it. It's been, recommended by a friend of a cousin of an uncle of a next door neighbor kind of thing. And they show up and they tell the doctor, who's a kind of an odd character, that they're having some difficulties. They are really told that they just need to give them a quick summary of what the trouble is. One man hates his job, another is having relationship issues, and the solution that the doctor immediately comes up with is, we'll prescribe you a cat. So a cat is brought out in a carrier case, and then the patient or client is handed a prescription, which they take to the desk, and they're given a bag with instructions. The instructions are basically, this is your cat, this is your cat's name, this is how old your cat is. Make sure you feed it, clean the litter when necessary, make sure the cat always has water. And they're allowed to take it for, say, in one case, 10 days, in another case, 2 weeks. And of course, each of these prescriptions tends to, the person ends up with the cat. That's not giving away too much. So the stories are about how people who really aren't accustomed to cats in these cases, and don't really quite know what to do with a cat. What am I supposed to do with this thing living in my apartment? How they learn to live with the cat, and how through a series of events in each case, having the cat changes their lives. And in every case, it changes it for the better. So, the person who hates his job, loses his job, and that's not at all what he intended to do. But because of the cat, he's immediately found another job, and the job involves the cat. So it has a whole series of things that occur all around each of these cats, which have different personalities and different needs. And I'm not going to give away the ending. I understand that you've read it. I will allow you to give away the ending if you want to, Jacob.
I don't think I will. I think
Okay.
this is one of those books that I don't want to spoil for people. But
Okay.
I love the way that the cats change the lives of the people that get them in this book, because they don't necessarily attribute these positive changes in their lives to the cats
That's right.
directly.
Yeah.
It's like you as a reader see it, but the characters themselves don't see it. Like, for example, there was one character who was a fashion designer, and after she got the cat because she was completely overworked, she was inspired to use like the imagery of cats in her fashion designs, and it ends up being hugely successful. And then you see in another short story, there's kind of like a little crossover where somebody sees the work of this fashion designer
Yes. Yes.
and
So
says,
they do
"Oh, I
have.
love that it's got a little cat design." They are like loosely tied together.
Yes,
These
that's
stories.
exactly right. And lest we forget, Japan is the land of Hello Kitty. So,
Yes.
Hello Kitty is an image that is everywhere. I remember I visited Japan once and seeing, fully adult women with Hello Kitty briefcases and suitcases and purses. And I thought that fashion designer surely refers to the Hello Kitty craze.
The name of the clinic in the book is called Nika Jayo Kikoro's Clinic for the Soul.
Yes.
And the fantasy element comes in that it seems like you can't find this place and people don't know about it unless you need it. Kind of like the room of requirements from Harry Potter. But if the requirement is a cat?
Then you find it, yes. And I think that one of the things I liked was that when you no longer need the clinic, you can't find it any longer. Even if you've been there more than once,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
gone. Yeah. It's disappeared.
In my mind's eye, in reading this book, everything was anime. Maybe just because it's Japanese, but there's something about the style, the tone of this book that I'm like, this is an anime series. It just has to be.
It certainly would do well as an anime series. I found that the language, obviously, I read it in translation in English, is quite stilted.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Yeah, it didn't translate well in some parts.
or else that was on purpose, and I couldn't tell. As you know, I have a volunteer position at PAL where I read aloud, and I've read a wide variety of things aloud. And as I mentioned, I read the first chapter of this aloud to my husband, and I found that it was much more difficult to read it aloud than to just read the text to myself. And I think it's because the language is stilted. It doesn't flow well. Um, is that because the story is kind of choppy? I don't know. Is the translation a poor translation? That's certainly one thing you could say. But having not been able to read the original, I can't say whether this is a feature of the original writing or whether this is something that happened during the translation and they just weren't that great at English. I mean, I really couldn't say. What was your opinion on that?
I think it definitely came off stilted,
Hmm.
but you make a good point that it could have been on purpose, because anytime there's a translation of a book from one language to another, there's a decision to be made on whether you want to try to translate the unique grammatical quirks of a language, right? Because the grammar and sentence structure in Japanese might be different than what it is in English.
Very much.
And you need to make, as a translator, you need to make that decision. Well, do I translate the sentence structure as well, or do I want to keep the tone, the structure as closely to the original Japanese as possible, even though it might sound a little janky in English. And this book does come off a little janky, and in a weird way, like, I'm from Canada, like this book, even though I read it in English, it did come off like quite foreign. Like it wasn't a Western book. Like you could tell right away. And I think that had a lot to do with the language, the sentence structure, but also the fact that the audiobook that I listened to, it had a handful of Japanese narrators. And so like it
Ah.
was quite authentic too.
Now, I saw that on Sila it is an automated voice narration, and I wondered if the audiobook was human narrated
This
or
book is
automated.
not available on Sela, unfortunately. I did
Hmm.
get it on Spotify, so I have a
On
subscription
Spotify.
on Spotify. And
I
if you
see.
have a premium subscription on Spotify, this book falls well under the 15-hour limit that you have per month. I think it's 5 hours, 6 hours.
It's
It's
not a
quite short.
long book. Yeah, that's right.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all.
Well, I compared it to two other books. One is one of the great classics of Japanese literature, the Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki. The English, sort of the classic version, was translated by Edward G. Seidensticker, and he is well known as being, or having been, one of the most, the premier translator from Japanese. And it is, it's a fabulous book, and it flows beautifully. The language is wonderful. Probably, I've read quite a bit of Tanizaki. All of his books do, no matter who's translated, but this one is lovely, and I think that it is well worth it. There is a cat in this book, and this cat, called Lily, is the story of the Makioka sisters follows a family through generations, and this cat slowly becomes more and more decrepit as the characters themselves age. It's quite an interesting feature of it. So I really thought that it made me think of that, but also at the same time as reading this, I was reading an older book by Kazuo Ishiguro, who is a British Japanese writer, and he wrote in English. The book that
Oh,
I'm thinking of is A Pale View of the Hills. He's written lots and lots of books, and I think his most famous book is one that takes place in England and has had movies made of it. He's really, it's called The Remains of the Day. You may have seen the movie years ago, but a Pale View of the Hills takes place entirely in Japan, in a really a post-apocalyptic Nagasaki. Um, and there are cats in this as well. In fact, Ishiguro has cats that show up fairly often, as Murakami does too. Another Japanese writer his translations are extremely popular. If you The bookstore that is down the road from me has to lock up copies of Murakami because it is the most stolen book. All of
what?
his books are the ones
Well,
that get stolen most frequently from this particular bookstore. The owner has no idea why, and yet, so we know Murakami is popular. He's got cats, in his books, and of course, there's a famous book by Soseki, quite a long time ago. The book is called "I Am a Cat," and so Japanese and cats really do come together. I will say that in the Ishiguro book, A Pale View of the Hills, cats don't have a happy life, and there are images of cats being destroyed. It's quite troubling, and the cats here in A Pale View of the Hills really parallel the life of a particularly damaged child. So that's not, I won't recommend it as being a light book like We'll Prescribe You a Cat, but is it a brilliant book? Yes, it is. And because it was written originally in English, and it is available on Sila, it's a smoother read, shall I say? Yeah. So
I would recommend We'll Prescribe You a Cat to anybody who loves cats, who's
yes.
looking for a light read, maybe something a little different. This is a book that I found really refreshing. It was definitely outside, that Western tradition of writing books. I don't know what it was about this one. It just felt so different, like something that I've just a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. If you're interested in Japanese culture, there's also a lot of that as well, especially considering that it's from a Japanese author, originally written in Japanese. You're immersing yourself in it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to give this one a solid, I like to give a score rating, 7.5 out of 10. What do you give it?
Probably 6. So I'm not
Okay.
that far behind you. I enjoyed reading it. It was a light read when I needed something lighter than, yeah, all the other things that are happening in life. But is it a great book? No, it's not a great book. And again, because the writing was awkward,
Yes.
it's not going to rise higher than that in my view.
Why do you think it got as popular as it did? Because this was an international sensation.
Absolutely. I think for the reasons that you described, it's like taking a little trip. You go
Yes.
someplace you've not been before. It has some very funny moments too, and I think a lot of us are looking for a little bit of humor these days. And it's short, it's refreshing, and let's face it, what can you find in huge quantities on the internet? Cat videos. People love cats, and here we go. Here's a novel that focuses on cats. It could almost be a cat video.
Yeah, and you can tell that the author loves cats too.
Yes.
There's like extensive description of like the color of a cat's fur and like their temperament and the way people play with cats. And you also learn a lot about cats' biology and anatomy and behavior and things you're supposed to do and stuff like that. And like the reason why cats and humans are so compatible. Like it's almost like advocating for why you should get a cat. And they say, we'll prescribe you a cat, and they literally call it like a dose of cat.
A dose of cat.
I am an absolute fiend if I'm dosing on Guillaume right now.
How old is your cat?
Guillaume is 2 years old. We still
so
got
adult.
some kitten energy. Yeah.
Oh,
He's
that's
an adult.
good. Now, Jacob, did anybody try to talk you out of getting a cat?
I feel like every time people are telling me the things you're supposed to do to keep him safe, like cats proof your house and make sure there's nothing that's toxic to them.
Yeah.
Basically, every video I would watch of like 10 things I wish I knew before getting a cat and how to welcome a cat to your new home. There were so many things that just felt like they were trying to discourage me in pointing out all the things that could hurt your cat, all the things that could kill your cat, all the things your cat could choke on. Like it was kind of overwhelming in that sense. It felt a little discouraging and I was nervous in the first couple of days, but now that we've settled in, it's like, no, it's all
fine.
worth it. I would empty your litter box 10 times a day and feed you 30 times a day. And I still had
Don't
a cat,
do it. You'll have a very fat cat.
Danielle, thank you so much for the review. This was awesome. We'll do it again.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And that's all the time we have for today's AMI audiobook review. Big thanks to Danielle McLaughlin for reviewing We'll Prescribe You, a Cat by Syou Ishida and bringing us a couple poems about cats. Very timely for the welcoming of my new cat Guillaume into my home. You can listen to AMI audiobook review on the weekends here on AMI Audio at 1 p.m. Eastern and repeats every 6 hours. I'm Jacob Chamansky. Have a good one.